Good evening and welcome to the Journey Home. It's open line first Monday, month of May, and usually in this program I invite back a previous guest, someone whose story you've already heard, but we take a little moment to bring you up to date on that. But part of the reason is because we want to spend more time on this open line segment for your phone calls and emails. So right off the bat, I'm going to give you the phone numbers because it's your questions that not only guide tonight's program, but put the guest in the hot seat. So are you ready for this, Ned? Our guest is Ned South. He works here at EWTN now, but before I go to Ned, let's give you the phone numbers, 1-800-221-9460. Or if you're outside North America, you can call us at 205-271-2980. And our guest is Ned South. Welcome to the Journey Home program. This is your third time?
Correct.
Is that right?
Right.
Third's a charm. What's that old phrase?
It's something like that. Sometimes that works.
In fact, the other reason that you're on tonight is we're tomorrow morning filming a special segment of the Journey Home program called Journey Home Roundtable. You'll hear about this in the fall, I presume, in which tomorrow we're filming the roundtable of 3 Anglican converts. And you're one of them, as long as you survive tonight's program until tomorrow. And then Father Ray Ryland will be with us, and also Dwight Longnecker has come from England to be on that panel.
That'll be exciting.
It'll be a good time. It's going to be a good time. Let's start by asking, telling the audience what you do here at EWTN.
I am the Program Acquisitions Manager, which means that I buy for the network all the out-of-house productions that we show. Most of our productions are made right here, almost probably 80%. But the other 20% is acquired from around the world. So I'm responsible for the acquisition of all English language from around the world. And if I can get it in another language at the same time, that's a part of the contract. But that's a neat job. It's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, in fact, so you're also in charge of the non-English acquisition if it's available?
If it's available under the English contract. Otherwise, the Spanish acquisitions takes care of that.
Okay. Well, and it's also, as we spread around the world into other languages and other cultures, we are looking for other materials, right?
We have a German strip.
That's right. Talking
about a French strip, and all of those would come from acquisitions.
All right, good. Let's remind the audience of quickly a synopsis of your journey into the Catholic Church.
I was born into the Episcopal Church on the third Sunday of Advent in 1933, with all the contingent problems. Being born into something, you take it for granted, But I did have wonderful parents who shaped me, formed me, and molded me into a good Episcopalian. They were very active in the church, and so was I. And I received what I perceived to be a call to ministry when I was in high school. Put it off for many years until I had been married and had children, and had to go back and finish both my undergraduate degree and do my graduate degree at the same time, which I did at Sewanee. Ordained in 70. Went through the trauma of the seminary experience of the 60s when everything was being changed, and there was a sense of...
Was it the parallel in that the seminaries that were going through Catholic seminaries
absolutely,
about the same time?
Absolutely. It was the get with it, get with the world, this is how it's really done. Tradition can give way to a secularized understanding of what religion ought to be about. I paid the price for that in some of my beliefs, in my own belief systems, got molded and reshaped, especially in consideration probably the abortion issue. At a time when I could, without hesitation, speak to someone about abortion. Changed very quickly when I held the hand of a young lady who was undergoing an abortion. Went through that and have never turned back. Look back, that was just the most atrocious thing I've ever been through. Went through a period in the church of dealing with the dissension within the Episcopal Church caused by various secularized understandings, including homosexuality, practicing homosexuality in the priesthood, the abortion issue, even contraception. as being something that I thought had some real problems with it without willing to do anything about it. Until finally in '96, along with 4 other men, we, very concerned about what was going on in the church, published a tract that was reminiscent of the Tractarian, the Oxford movement of 1833, with about the same sort of result. They did not profoundly affect the development of the church, but many of them, including Newman, came into the Catholic Church. Well, as a result of that, I was forced to review my own beliefs, my own thoughts, and the end of that, after reading your book, Journeys Home, which you gave to my wife Lee one night here, profoundly affected how I had to recall what the meaning of the church was, and came into the church in Easter of '98. So, and about the same time I started working here.
You know, I'd forgotten all that. I mean, we didn't have a chance to review it today, but
Yeah.
I'd forgotten not only the Journey Home book had been a part of it, but
Right.
that you came in after the Journey Home program started.
That's right.
And your
That's
wife,
right.
Lee, was
Right.
working here at EWTN. And
Right.
That's right. Praise
Right.
God. And something else that strikes me interesting about what you said is that it seems that in Anglicanism, there's often been times when Anglicans have grouped together to try and renew the church and produce tracts or produce things to try and renew the church. But I don't remember that often happening in other Protestant denominations. It's more often the case in the other
Right.
the groups get together and just form another church.
Right. Or there's a movement for renewal, as in the Great Awakening. You know,
Right.
that was within the context of the church.
Or
It was not-
evangelicalism within Presbyterianism
Correct.
today, for example. things
not
like
calling for renewal of the church itself, just renewal of the membership of the church.
that. And I wondered if that's partially because in some of these denominations, because of the polity of the denomination, the thought of trying to renew the denomination
Right, would be anathema.
would be not going to work. Whereas within Anglicanism, you still have the hierarchy.
Right.
There's an idea that there's some kind of structure. Now, it's not a parallel exactly to the Catholic hierarchy, but there's, at least you have a
Correct.
feeling that it's worth trying. And another example is Tom Reeves. Remember, he wrote his book about what's it called? Emptying the Pews or something like that. But he was
Oh, right, right,
and
right.
that was a book that he was
Right.
trying to shoot over the bow to try
Right.
and get attention, to try and bring
Right,
renewal.
right.
And then, of course, eventually he came into the church himself.
right.
So it's
As I say, I think you write that sort of stuff, and you have only one place to go, and that's to reflect on what you've written and why, and can I stay where I am, having reviewed the problems, you know, or do I have to move?
yeah. And as with so many clergy, that affects not just your job, but your family and friends, and really can. Let me ask you this: did it confront you when you did convert, and you recognized all the issues that were essential to converting? Did you have to do a lot of mea culpas about what you preached or how you led folk at one time in the past? Was that
Not
something for you?
necessarily for me, because I was what I perceived as an Anglo-Catholic,
Okay.
with a high sense of the values and a theology of Eucharist and of the sacraments, all 7 sacraments. The place of Mary in the church developed for me slowly, but was not. I don't recall anything that I, with the exception of abortion, having ever said anything about that I repented later.
All right. We were talking earlier about, you and I were talking earlier about the conversion of Anglican clergy in the church. You brought up something you saw in a letter I happened to send you, right?
It was the Journey Home Network
Coming
letter
Home
for the
Network.
month, Coming Home Network letter for the month, and it had a table of statistics of all of those various denominations, there must have been 50 on there, who have either come into the Catholic Church or are coming into the Catholic Church.
The clergy from these denominations. I think
denominations.
we're almost up to 900 that we've
Right.
been working with. Right?
And they were the result of the networks of your Coming Home Network activities and the input and assistance that you gave these people. Almost 25% of that total number were either Episcopalians or Anglicans of various portions of Anglicanism. That says to me a lot about what the Catholic Church means for people who have a high sacramental understanding of life and of the Church.
Let me ask you first question then, given those kind of statistics, as you reflect back over, not personally, but over the last 200 years, reflecting back, as one gray hair to the other, we reflect back over the last 200 years from what you've read about the conversions. What is the draw? What is the reason that you see that there was such a high percentage of Anglican clergy, particularly clergy converts, over the last 200 years?
I think the clergy become educated to the degree that they're willing to look at the history of the Church, the early Church Fathers. They have a working knowledge of that. They're aware that something is missing. And as in the case of John Henry Cardinal Newman, it was the fact that there were dynamics of the Anglican Church of that period that had physically removed from the understanding of the theology of the Anglican Church aspects of Roman Catholicism that were valid, were powerful, including purgatory, for example. I think that is true for the clergy who have come in, that they have seen that there's a fullness that they're missing, that there is, on balance, something that ought to be there that is not.
You mentioned the discovery of history, right, and the theology and all that. I was talking with Dwight Longnecker, who I mentioned will be here tomorrow for our taping, and he was talking about an Anglican that he knows in England who said that the reason he could never become Catholic is because Anglicanism is the faith of my country. Right. And well, again, when you discover history, you recognize no, that's Anglicanism right. is not the faith right. of that island over there, right?
Right. That's correct. It was artificially became that island's religious expression, but it was Catholic.
That's right.
Had always been Catholic, and until Henry decided that some things had to be done for the sake of the monarchy, it was Catholic up to that very point.
And all you got to do is look at the outside of Canterbury Cathedral,
correct,
and see that it was obviously designed
right.
as a Catholic
right.
place of worship. Now, let's go to the other side. Given that, with all these reasons to be drawn to the
right.
home and the similarities, and there could be more you could add to it, why aren't there more? Because actually, given some of the changes that have happened in the church, we were kind of expecting
right.
more.
Right. But
why aren't there more?
I think that a part of the answer to that is that people who have been struggling with it believe honestly that Anglicanism has a depth and a broadness that they wanted to maintain and hold, but not within the context of the Episcopal Church USA. So the prevalence of breakaway churches, of churches that maintain some sort of contact with Anglicanism, was appealing for them. And I don't think that they looked twice. Yeah. I think that satisfied them. They understood that there was authority within that was not implicit in the Episcopal Church that they left. But it satisfied other needs.
Sometimes I often think about what are the barriers that separate people from the church, and I know on the program I've talked about many of them. Just recently I was thinking about a barrier that prevents people from coming home to the church that might be a particular barrier of laity, and that is that if they may not have a lot of background in history themselves,
right.
but if they ever hear something good about the Catholic Church that might draw them that direction, what they might think is, well, if the Catholic Church was true, then certainly my good leaders would go.
Right.
But if they're not
right.
going,
right.
well, then why should I consider it? I mean,
right.
these good folk
right.
obviously wouldn't have been separated if
right.
the Catholic Church is true.
Right.
It's because of their trust for their leaders. And of course, then when you see the leaders splintering, then the question is,
right.
well, now what do I do?
Right.
But still, if they don't see the leaders going to the Catholic Church but forming their own
Right.
churches, well, then if they do it, then it must be all right for me.
I agree. I think that's very, very logical.
Yeah, we see that a lot, not just in Episcopalianism,
Right, but in
Anglicanism,
other
but we
denominations,
see it all
right.
over the place. We do have our first caller, and this comes from Mary in New York. Hello, Mary. What's your question for us tonight?
Hi, Marcus. My question is, I have a friend who left the Catholic Church, became an Episcopalian, and is a deaconess in her church. She tells me that they have absolute proof of the apostolic succession of the priesthood and the bishops and what have you in the Episcopal and the Anglican churches. She also says the only difference is the papacy. Can I get the straight skinny on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I told Ned we'd have no real difficult questions tonight. Yes, Ned. Thank you, Mary, for the question.
The Anglican Church always has prided itself on apostolic succession. And up until, as I recall, the end of the 19th century, it had generally been accepted as true. And it was not until there was a papal letter, edict, I'm not sure what it was, that called into question some of the subsequent ordinations.
Leo the 13th.
Oh, is that
Yeah,
right?
right.
Okay, Leo the 13th. But up until that point, it had never been called into question. Anglicans still show on their own charts and in their own belief system that it is apostolic. And I'm not sure it's worth arguing about.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. My only understanding was a part of the problem was way early on. I forget if it was Cranmer or Cromwell, in that
Yeah.
time, there was a real distinct move to make that division.
Right.
And that's where some of the questions came. But then later, when there was ideas about recognizing the similarity between Anglicanism and Catholicism, that then there was more of a move to reestablish that apostolic succession.
The only thing I would add to that is the legitimacy of succession has got to be called into question if the only reason for the apostolic succession is because of schism, because of break, because of I don't believe what you believe, so therefore I'm going to go my own way. Somehow there's a break in that can't be denied. At least intellectually there's a break. So does that affect the actual line?
Well, and it's also because apostolic succession isn't merely the magical laying on of hands,
Right.
Like a chain. He laid a hand on him, it's more than that.
Right.
It's more than the mere physical,
Right.
laying on of hands. There's more that has to do with the conversion of heart, the commitment of heart, the loyalty, the submission to authority. All
Right.
those are a part of it.
Right.
So it's not merely a genealogical table, who did it to who.
Right. Although that is one
it's part
level.
of it. Yes,
That's
it's a
correct.
part of it,
Right.
but that isn't all that it
Correct.
is.
Right.
Okay, and because if that were all it is, and you could do some tracing and find some fairly weird religious person out here that could say, I could trace mine. I go back to William the Conqueror and whatever, and
You get that in genealogy all the time.
yeah, right. So, okay, let's try our first email. This comes from C&J in St. Louis, Missouri, Mr. South. It has always been our understanding that the Anglican Church was founded by Henry VIII when the Catholic Church would not approve his divorce. With this in mind, why is it that Anglicans don't come back to the Catholic Church in droves? In your case, did you ever think that about becoming a Catholic once you studied the history of the founding of the Anglican Church? Thank you, CJ. Again, giving him a very mild question here.
Well,
Henry just won't go away.
That's right. Henry is here tonight, isn't he? I think that from the perspective of the history of within the Anglican Church, the reason for Henry's action was monarchical. He'd gone through the 100-year, the War of the Roses. The houses were still at odds. What was going to cause peace? The only thing that was going to cause peace was going to be a succession issue. So there was some legitimacy to the actions taken based on the need of the monarchy to have succession. When you boil that down to moral issues, then you have to come up with a whole different answer. But the reality is it happened, and it became what it was. At the very beginning, the Anglican Church was as Catholic as it could be. Henry was as Catholic as he could be. It was only in successive generations from that moment that that Protestantism became more paramount in Anglicanism. But at the very beginning, the intent was, let's keep this island a part of the Catholic Church, but under our own authority, and you can't add that.
That was a nice spin you put on that. I mean, I agree with that. I'm a little bit more polemical about it, but I won't go there tonight because we want to be charitable. But I mean, not that I go to the full extreme of just focusing on just the sexual side of heresy. It's not so much that there was. The part that bothers me so much about it was, I'm sure it can be explained through the monarchical side, the desire of that, but the fact that those who would not agree face such dire consequences. That whole side of it that happened so quickly. That, to me, when I read the story of the martyrdom of John Fisher, just tears me apart. Tears me apart, you know. And I've often wondered how Anglicans feel when they read stories like the martyrdom of
I'm not sure they do.
John Fisher.
You know, it just is not a part of the approved reading process. You know,
on the condemned books.
Right.
You know, on the list of books. Okay, let's take our next caller. This is Randy from Maine. Hello, Randy. What's your question?
Hi. My question is, in the Book of Common Prayer that the Episcopals use, I see nothing in there that would differ from the way the Catholics practice. Am I right on that? And is not sola scriptura the major difference between Catholicism and all Protestant denominations?
Thank you, Randy.
Sola scriptura, it would be foreign to Anglicanism. That is not true. Tradition has always been a strong facet. There's reason, tradition, and scripture, the three-legged stool that Anglicans
and it would have,
hold.
you know, what is it, the 37 articles or
39
something?
articles.
39 articles. I mean, they're right
for
off the
England,
bat.
there are less for the United States.
Right. But the point is that right off the bat, there's a tradition that would stand in how you would interpret Scripture based on that. Okay.
Correct. And as far as the Book of Common Prayer is concerned, the wording would imply that there's compliance with Catholic theology, but the theology behind the wording is very different. For example, in the Eucharist, the defining term is real presence. You can literally do with that whatever you want. Right. For me, it was real presence, the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. But that would be probably a very small minority of Anglicans who would
Wouldn't
say
that have been against the 39 articles, to take it the way you were taking it?
And die with Fisher? I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
But I mean, in fact, you're exactly right, and I think the audience needs to. I've had a number of emails from Anglicans who get a little upset with me when I say there's a difference between the two understandings of the Eucharist, because they'll say, well, we believe in the real presence.
Right.
Well,
the real presence is not defined.
Yeah, those words, those terms.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I think it was deliberate so that you could be wherever you want on that spectrum, you know, and at the same time, that doesn't answer any questions.
Yeah.
You know, it's just very weak.
Right.
But they do have the 7 sacraments, although there are 2 called the greater sacraments, baptism and Eucharist, and the 5 lesser sacraments. I've always argued that it would be parallel to you're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You know, there's either 5, there are either 7 or there aren't 7. You know, so it's all right for what it's worth.
Okay, let's take a break. Got a couple emails waiting, but we'll get them when we get back. So we'll see you in just a bit with my guest, Ned South, tonight, and he's talking particularly about issues that deal with Anglicanism and the Catholic Church. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest tonight is Ned South, and he's a convert to the Catholic Church from the Anglican Church, and he was a Anglo-Catholic pastor. Right. Would you have called yourself Anglo-Catholic or just Anglican, but of Anglo-Catholic persuasion? Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay. Because I was a Presbyterian and I wasn't quite as familiar with all the different divisions within Anglican Church. And I know within Presbyterians we had 9 major divisions that we all called ourselves Presbyterian. About how many would you say are there in the Anglican
Gosh, I
Church?
really couldn't
it's
say.
just so many.
I know the first major breakaway in the Anglican Church goes back to arguments over the place of the National Council of Churches in America back in, I think, '54, and a significant number of people broke away at that. Then the prayer book issue, the rewriting of the prayer book, took many away, and then the ordination of women to the priesthood took a large number of people away, and then the secularization issues of the church today are breaking others away. So I have no idea how many.
One other thing, it's interesting you mentioned that because you didn't go back beyond 50, but isn't it true that in general our culture is less of a club kind of culture? In other words, people aren't as loyal to groups anymore anyway.
Right.
You know, it used to be men were involved with some little club or some fraternity of some sorts, and we've changed.
Right.
And it seems to me when I was a pastor, my new members classes every 3 months were full of everything else.
Right.
And it's interesting that you mentioned you went back to the 50s and look at all the divisions, whereas, let me ask you, back in 1930, when the Lambeth Conference kind of opened the door for contraception, was there also a movement away then? Or?
I don't think so. What is fascinating about that is we always use 1930 because it's a very ambiguous language, but it does support contraception. 1920 conference, Lambeth Conference, was solidly against it and verbally, abusive of those who would use it. 10 years, what happens?
Wow.
But you can look at today and say, same 10-year sorts of increments, the changes in the church.
Interesting, 1920, 1930, in England, you had some major voices that were pro-contraception, like H.G. Wells and George Bernard Shaw. I mean, a group of very influential folk in England who were very much pushing that along with Margaret Sanger and that whole group. So, all right, let's grab this email from Francis in Illinois. Christ is risen. Dear Marcus and guest, sometimes I have heard that Anglicans and Orthodox have had an agreement that if you are somewhere where there is not your church of attendance, you should look to the other church for attendance and communion. If this is true, did you have any leanings to Orthodoxy? And why did you choose the Catholic Church instead of one of the Eastern churches?
That's a good question. There are 2 answers to it. One, I know of nothing written or verbal that would lead anyone to believe that there was a common communion, because there in fact is not communion between Anglicans and the Orthodox of any denomination. The only thing that traditionally was in communion was the old Catholic Church, which was a breakaway from Roman Catholicism back at the beginning of the last century. As far as my own personal journey was concerned, I looked at the Orthodox varieties, possible directions that I could go. But the worship experience was just so foreign to my own understanding of worship, of my own experiences in worship. I just couldn't feel comfortable with it. And I know many priests who went that direction from the Episcopal Church and are very comfortable with it, but it just didn't work for me.
All right. Let's take our next caller, Robert from Maryland. Hello, what's your question for us tonight?
Marcus, I'd like to thank you for the wonderful witness and the great program, first of all. Secondly, it's so impressive to hear the faith of the converts that come into the church, and I have often wondered what things do we as the laity unconsciously or unknowingly do that might deflect someone like your guest from considering the Catholic Church or coming into the church?
Oh, thank you for that question. So what do the laity do to help or to hinder?
We had talked a little bit about that, which is interesting. Thank you, Robert. I think there are 2 sides, there are 2 questions, parts of that, dynamics to that question. One is, where is the laity in the process of conversion? Is that viable? I think that by and large, there are not very many laymen on the way to the church because of the lack of catechesis. We're just not taught very well about what the church really is, what it historically has been, what are the teachings of the church on the sacraments historically, and if you're unaware of where the church is really coming from, you can be very comfortable where you are. As for my own personal journey, I was very fortunate to be in a parish that did not take umbrage particularly at my own religious experience. But of course, by the time it was only after I retired that I came into the Catholic Church. The only parallel that I can give is when my wife Lee came into the Catholic churches when I was still a pastor in Northeast Ohio, and I can still remember Lee's words to the congregation as we felt this had to be addressed. She had come into the Catholic Church, and there were rumors about, I was going to Rome to be received by the Holy Father, and and so forth, and we realized that had to be addressed, and so Lee talked to the congregation and said effectively, those of you who love me will love me still. Those of you who have never liked me, I have not given you any reason to like me anymore. She's a brave soul and a delight. So, in that sense, there were still people who affirmed her in the parish, and there were others who just could not understand what was going on. You're going to find that wherever you are.
I think the main thing, again, if I make a comment on that, is I went 40 years before anyone talked to me about the Catholic faith.
Right.
And I knew Catholics, but they don't talk about their faith. I worked in a lab in a genetics lab for about 6 months at a university in Cleveland, alongside a couple gentlemen, and they knew I used to be a Protestant minister. We talked all the time. We were in the lab, and I didn't know they were Catholics till they showed up one Wednesday with gray stuff on their forehead.
Right.
It never came up.
Yeah.
We need to take advantages of those people that God has put into our mission field.
Right.
To share the faith.
Well, and I had the same experience, only I was in the upper 60s when that finally came to pass. And I had been in dialogue with ecumenical groups, with Catholic priests for years and years and years. But you see, it's not kosher to proselytize. It's not nice to talk to someone else about your religion with any expectation that they might take it seriously. I think that's an impediment.
It is an impediment. I mean, you put the quotes on it because really that isn't necessarily proselytizing, I mean,
Right.
we should share and talk to others about things that are most important to us. And if our faith is, then we ought to talk about it, and open the door for them to talk about their faith. And
Absolutely.
then, there's dialogue. Let's take this next email. Now, I knew we were going to have to get to this issue tonight, so, and Kathy from Ohio wouldn't let us get away from it, but it's probably when we need to discuss, obviously. Dear Marcus, always love your show. Thank you, Kathy. Could you and your guests speak to the ramifications of the election of the openly gay bishop and how this is truly affecting the body of Christ? I feel that the American media is so strongly pro-homosexual marriage that we're not hearing the story and the possible divisions this issue is causing.
That's very true. The ordination of the Bishop of New Hampshire, an openly gay man, I think caused the Episcopal Church to stop in its tracks and to ask itself questions that some of us have been asking for years and years. Where do I go? What can I do? And for many, it became obvious that they had, in order to stay in the Episcopal Church, into the Anglican communion, had to receive Episcopal oversight from other sources. They've gone to Africa, they've gone to Southeast Asia, and bishops there have said they would give them missionary status within the context of the province of the United States. And that has happened, and a good number of Episcopalians, I read it in some newspapers,
It's not in the front pages anymore.
No, very few occasion do you hear about this. But it's happening all the time. I keep asking myself the question, if they're going to do that, and if they are truly leaving the church because of a theological issue, then why is the Catholic Church not understood and considered in that process?
That's right, considered. Because as if you stand, I mean, sometimes the devil overplays his hand, right?
Right.
And I think that might be a little bit of what we might see here, in the sense that this is going to shock some people.
Right.
It has shocked some people, and hopefully they'll take a step back
Right.
and look at, if I break away one more time, it's just one continuous
Right.
series
Of steps away.
breaking
Right.
and breaking away. What's
Right.
going to stop
Right.
that? I mean,
Right.
the Methodist Church was a breakaway.
Correct.
These are all little breakaways, and look at the
Right.
Methodist divisions that there are. At what point are they going to take a step back?
And saying, enough. I've divided so much I can't. I'm called to reflect on that. What does it mean? And if it means, as it did for me, where is the source of all this? Then there's only one source, and that's to come back to the Catholic Church.
And to quote Shakespeare, "Methinks thou protest too much." Okay. Let's take this next caller, Jesse from California.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. What's the role of Mary in the Anglican Church? What's the difference, and what's the similarity with the Catholic Church?
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank
Great
you,
question
Jesse.
for me.
Right.
That's great.
Right. That's, I think it depends, two things. Mary is seen in a very elevated role, and I use that terminology, deliberately. She is seen as the quintessential woman. She is honored. There are hymns about her. There are prayers. There are all sorts of dimensions in the Anglican Church. But it really depends on where you are in the spectrum of the religious experience. If you're a high churchman, if you're Anglo-Catholic, then Mary has a higher place. And there are many Anglicans who do the Rosary. There are many Anglicans who wouldn't know Mary if they fell across her. There's that broad a spectrum.
In fact, there were, before the Reformation, there were what's it called, the Little Office of Mary,
Right.
printed in English,
Right.
in English
Right.
in England before
Right.
the Reformation.
Right. And
So there's a long-standing tradition there.
correct. And within Anglicanism,
Yeah.
she is there, has been. For me, Mary was, as a person, was never an impediment. Some of the doctrines about Mary, I had to do some serious reflecting on. The Assumption was the first one I dealt with, and my rationale was, if Jesus is going to raise anybody to be with him in heaven, it's going to be his mother. So that was no problem for me. The Immaculate Conception raised questions for me, which were resolved by, if I'm coming into the Catholic Church with my eyes open, then I must trust the magisterium of the Church and the teaching of the Church in certain matters. And so, therefore, I have no problem with accepting that.
That's right. For so many, Newman, you mentioned Newman earlier, and for so many, John Henry Cardinal Newman had a big influence on their journey. He was one of the biggest influences on his books, were a
Right.
big influence on me. Was he an influence on your own journey?
He was the hardest man in the world to read. I could look at some stuff and find it hard to translate it, for myself. So his life was more of a model for me than the actual readings. I knew where he had been, knew how he got there. His actual readings were not what brought me in, just his life.
I guess I look back, when I started reading Newman, I'd already resigned from my pastorate and was trying to figure out where I was going to go, and I had the time to read.
Right.
Because it's got to be harder to read through the development of dogma when you're pastoring a church. Yeah, that's a good point. We have a caller, Rob from Pennsylvania. Hello, what's your question for us?
Hi, I'm a former Anglican monk with the Order of the Holy Cross, in fact, up in upstate New York. And I was wondering if Father Smith misses celebrating the Mass at all.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, that is a good question. There are times, and I notice it myself at every Mass, when I am literally a part of what's going on. Not physically, obviously, but emotionally I am. And but I don't miss it in the sense that that I've got to have it. One of the options, obviously, for lots of Anglican clergy coming into the Catholic Church is the maintenance of their orders. It depends on the bishop of that diocese, and some bishops are very open to doing that, and some bishops are very reluctant to do that. So it would have been an option for me, but I was more interested in pursuing the church as a lay person rather than as an ordained person. But yeah, those memories are there.
Yeah, and I do think that's an important point in the sense that one thing we have to do in our work is to sometimes slow down the converts who really want to pursue priesthood, and we have to divide conversion and vocation separately, but also recognize that if all you and I did was go to become priests, then we're giving a message to Catholic laymen.
Absolutely true. Absolutely
that we
true.
believe the only way to have an apostolate is to be a priest.
Right.
And so, but I do miss preaching.
Yeah.
Do you miss preaching? I do.
Well, I do to Lee a lot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
When I'm out in the barn with my cow,
With a cow.
I'll preach. You know. Get back in that stuff. Okay. All right, we have an email from Tom in Wisconsin. Greetings, gentlemen. If I am correct, the history of the Anglican break from the Catholic Church included the removal of icons, decorations, and other beautiful artwork from churches in England. He didn't say this, but sometimes I use sledgehammers, but we won't go there. My questions are, what was the spiritual value of the art that was lost then? And is there a parallel to what so many Catholic churches look like today, so void of artistic beauty? Thank you, Tom.
That's a good point, but I don't think it can be isolated. We went through the iconoclastic controversy in the church back in, the 6th century, thereabouts, when myriads of irreplaceable works of art were destroyed. So it is not unique to this one experience, but in actuality, many things were lost. Yeah. And who knows? I'm not sure that there's any way of ever determining the value of it. Yes, there are many. As far as the current trend in the church to be plain, I'm not sure where that's coming from, unless I said it has to do with secularization. We want to be more of what the people are, in their own lives, instead of holding up beauty and the transcendence of God's presence. Mother's vision is the perfect example of that, with the shrine. And many new churches that are built like that are bringing people to them because that brings you back to a vision of God, and we were in a church recently where there wasn't even a crucifix, and that was just very sad for me personally. There was something missing.
Yeah, something I've wondered about, and what do you think about this slant on that? And that is that if during a period of time a portion of the people in their own faith is primarily externalized and not an internal conversion, connection with the externals of the faith, and then the church goes through a renewal of sorts, and they want renewal, and they experience it, that sometimes they look back and blame those externals as the distraction that prevented them from having the renewal.
Right.
And so that stuff was in the way, so let's get it out of the way so future kids won't have that distraction.
I think that's probably valid.
And I think that happened during the Reformation, the 1500s, in Germany. It happened in England, and some of that's happening today. I think that those are getting rid of it. It didn't help them when they were younger, so they're blaming that stuff rather than learning the meaning of that stuff.
Right. The statues, the wonderful statues.
Yeah.
The chapel, outdoor chapel that Mother has furnished out here came from, as I recall, churches that were being destroyed. And this was the only way to save them. And I do recall one story where the huge crucifix up there was being put in, and Mother heard the Lord say, "Thank you for bringing me home." I just, I have no doubt in my mind, but that's absolutely true.
Yeah. Let's take this next email. Thomas in Chicago writes, "Hello, is the Anglican Church strongly against abortion?" Thank you, Thomas.
Oh, God, no. On paper, yes.
Oh, really? Even on paper? I didn't think it was even on paper.
Oh, yes. It has said in various conventions that abortion is an evil to be combated, but that the rights of a woman need to take precedence. But in another place, they'll say it may not be used for birth control. And yet, in this last million march in Washington, members of the Episcopal Church were very visibly there, protecting the right of abortion. So it's a very ambiguous sort of relationship to the issue in the church. You'll find many Anglicans who are just solidly against it, and you'll find others who are just ambiguous about it.
Do you see that pro-life, the frustration there of the pro-lifers within the Anglican Church, does that lead to some of these divisions, or are all the Anglican different groups pretty much the same when it comes to this issue?
I think those who have broken from the main body of the church pretty much are in agreement that abortion is an issue, and it may not be used as the Episcopal Church has given its permission.
All right. Looking here, I got an email they're getting ready for me really quickly, but it's in a font that I just can't read. Maybe they'll get it to me quickly, but we're getting ready. Okay, let's try it. Let's try this very quickly before we go to a break. Comes from Thomas K. in Pennsylvania. Hello, gentlemen. I am not a Catholic. My cable network has just recently begun carrying EWTN, and I am just enthralled. Welcome, Kay in Pennsylvania. I've probably had it on more than all channels combined since I found it. So I am learning, sometimes curious, sometimes absolutely blessed. My question to you both is, what do you say to folk like me? How is it you look at those in Protestant congregations who do believe? Essentially, what are they missing if they never, quote, come home, as you put it? Thank you, Thomas. Keep watching The Journey Home every week. That's what we'll be talking about every week. Well, go ahead, Ned. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for the question. I think what is missing is the life of the sacraments, principally, and the assurance that you're in a religious experience that has boundaries, that has the magnificent understanding of authority, that you've got the Holy Father who is the voice of the Church, and you have a magisterium that has the history and the writings of the Church to reflect on and to pass on to the Church itself. Yeah. Nobody else has that.
Well, I agree. I mean, there are some that will say they have it, but one of the unique differences, which is that we can trace this back to Jesus picking the 12, promising those 12 the Holy Spirit that would guide them into truth, and because we take that literally and very seriously, we've held to that for 2,000 years. I mean, that's really the unique. So you can feel confident that those boundaries that you just mentioned are trustworthy with your life now and forever.
The advantage of people who are Protestant and watch EWTN is they have the opportunity of seeing what truth is. It presented in a way that is neither confronting nor polemic, but is given in love and in hope that they will see the truth within the message.
Yeah. Good point. I often tell my guests, probably a good time to tell you this, that I always prepare my guests to let them know that this program is not anti-Protestant, because almost all of my guests found our Lord Jesus Christ long before we were ever told about the Catholic Church. I'm eternally grateful to those men and women. Our goal is to point to the fullness of truth that is here in the Catholic Church, that by God's grace, you know, He awakened poor souls like you and me to discover, right? So, let's take a final break. We'll be back in just a moment for some final words for the journey home. one final email I'd like to read before we go to a final question for Ned. This comes from Jackie in Mentor, Ohio. She writes, "Hello, I am so pleased to finally see you on the program. I have seen the program that featured your wife, Lee. I am from Mentor, Ohio, and I go to IC in Willoughby, Ohio. Is that Immaculate Conception? That must be the name of the church. I am a lifetime Catholic. You were instrumental in helping my friends from Concord when they made a trip to Irondale a few years ago. I wish you all the best. I admire your faith and courage." Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you.
How has becoming a Catholic strengthened your faith in Jesus Christ?
I can answer very quickly. It's the sacramental life of the church. As I said, there's a sacramental life to the church. For me, there had been in the Episcopal Church. It was only when I came to the realization that there was a depth to the sacramental life in the Catholic Church that I was missing. The body, soul, divinity of our Lord being available to me every time I go to Mass, strengthens me and helps me to become the person I hope that the Lord is calling me to be. That and the authority of the Church.
One of the things that struck me when I came into the church, I used to think I really knew theology.
Yeah.
I became Catholic, and I realized I had only scratched the surface.
Oh, right.
Did you find the same thing when you came into the church?
Absolutely. Thought I knew it all.
Well,
Still
the depth
think
of spiritual theology, like John of
Right.
the Cross and
Right.
the wonderful aspects of
Right.
that. And I'm so grateful to in fact, it was the programming at EWTN, Father Grishel and Father Pacwa and Mother Angelica that had challenged me even before coming in. And what a privilege you and I have gotten to get close to these fine folk. So, Ned, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Journey home.
Thank
It's
you.
a great
God bless
pleasure.
you. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us each week. Thank you for your prayers. I ask you to continue to keep Mother Angelica and the sisters and the network in your prayers. Remember, your support is what keeps this network going. So thank you very much. It is always a pleasure to join you in this program, and we walk this journey with Christ together. God bless you. I'll see you again next week.